A pale sun crawls above Siberia's endless horizon, spilling light over a landscape of ice, steel, and smoke. Inside the gilded halls of the Kremlin, cameras flash as two men sign a document the world was never meant to ignore. $2 billion, 2,600 miles of pipeline, a project so vast it could redraw the map of global energy and quietly rewrite the balance of power in Asia. They call it Power of Siberia 2, a massive gas artery connecting the frozen fields of Yakutia to China's industrial heartland. Once complete, it will pump 50 billion cubic meters of gas each year, enough to keep every factory in Beijing running through a winter of sanctions and shortages. Officially, it's an energy partnership. In reality, it's a geopolitical weapon wrapped in steel and buried under permafrost. For Moscow, the pipeline means survival, a financial lifeline after Europe slammed its doors. For Beijing, it's leverage, the ability to dictate terms to a desperate ally. And for the quiet nation caught between them, Mongolia, it's an approaching storm it cannot stop. As diplomats toast the deal, American reconnaissance satellites detect something unusual: long convoys of trucks moving south through Siberia, escorted by armored vehicles and signal jamming units. They're not just carrying construction gear. Some trailers are shielded, unmarked, and guarded like nuclear cargo. The handshake in Moscow lasts 9 seconds, but the consequences may echo for decades. This is conflict signal. And this is how a $2 billion pipeline became the first front in a hidden war for Mongolia. The journey of this steel leviathan begins in Yakutia, a frozen wilderness the size of France and Spain combined. Temperatures here drop below -50 degrees Celsius, and the air is so dry that metal cracks like glass. Yet beneath the permafrost lies the treasure that fuels empires: more than 1.3 trillion cubic meters of natural gas. For decades, these fields supplied Europe through the vast Soviet network of pipelines stretching toward Poland and Germany. But after sanctions choked those routes, the valves were sealed and the gas had nowhere to go. Tank farms filled, pressure built, and billions of dollars in revenue evaporated. Moscow needed a new direction, and Beijing provided one. In a closed-door meeting 2 years earlier, Chinese negotiators proposed a bold idea: a 2,600-mile corridor running south through Siberia and across Mongolia, ending in the industrial provinces north of Beijing. Russia would supply the fuel. China would bankroll the construction. Mongolia would allow the passage. On paper, the project was simple. In practice, it meant carving a pipeline through mountain ranges, permafrost, and desert plains, a feat rivaling the Trans-Siberian Railway. Thousands of engineers, welders, and soldiers were deployed to the frontier. Whole towns appeared overnight: prefab housing, medical stations, and command centers marked only by serial numbers instead of names. Every weld, every bolt was monitored in real time by Chinese and Russian satellites. Officially, this was to ensure safety. Unofficially, it ensured control. Neither side trusted the other, but both needed what the other could provide: money and gas, power and time. And watching from orbit, Western analysts began to see patterns: supply lines that looked more like military logistics than civilian work. Roads were widened, bridges reinforced, and communications encrypted. It was clear the Power of Siberia 2 was not merely an energy project. It was an infrastructure of influence, stretching across an entire continent. On paper, the deal was a triumph for diplomacy, two neighbors turning resources into cooperation. But deep inside both governments, the real motives had little to do with energy. For Russia, Power of Siberia 2 was not about prosperity. It was about survival. After losing access to Europe's markets, Moscow's energy exports dropped by more than 70% in just a year. Billions in revenue vanished overnight. Entire towns built around pipeline terminals fell silent. The Kremlin needed a buyer big enough to replace the West, and only one country could do it: China. But Beijing never buys without leverage. Its negotiators forced prices down by nearly 40%, demanding control over transit routes, insurance, and even data access for flow monitoring. Each clause tightened the noose. For China, the pipeline was less a partnership and more a pipeline of influence, a steel thread weaving Moscow's economy into its own industrial web. Every cubic meter of gas meant deeper dependence, a slow transfer of power measured not in soldiers or ships, but in contracts and supply chains. And there was Mongolia, the land in between, a small democracy surrounded by giants. Ulaanbaatar's officials were promised $500 million in transit fees and jobs for thousands of workers. Yet behind the figures lay a stark reality. The route cut directly through 5 provinces, threatening wildlife reserves, sacred burial grounds, and the fragile water table that sustains half the nation's herders. Inside Mongolia's parliament, voices of protest rose, warnings that their neutrality was being sold meter by meter. But Moscow and Beijing didn't wait for approval. The first convoys were already rolling south. Western observers began calling the deal economic annexation, a quiet conquest that required no armies, only signatures. The world saw an energy project. Intelligence agencies saw something else entirely. A strategic corridor perfectly positioned between Russia's missile fields and China's northern air bases. It was becoming clear. Power of Siberia 2 wasn't just about gas. It was about building an empire you couldn't see until it was finished. By mid-October, the great construction race had begun. Along a corridor more than 2,600 miles long, the silence of the Siberian tundra was replaced by the constant roar of engines. Satellite images captured by European agencies revealed over 30,000 workers deployed across the frozen plains. But not all of them were engineers. Mixed among them were uniformed guards from the Federal Protective Service, Russia's elite internal security force. On paper, they were there to prevent theft and sabotage. In reality, they were fortifying the route as if preparing for a siege. Armored vehicles patrolled every 50 kilometers. Mobile radar dishes scanned the horizon for drones. In Mongolia's north, villages awoke to the thunder of convoys, hundreds of flatbed trucks carrying steel pipe, heavy machinery, and something else. Containers wrapped in military canvas, marked only with barcodes. Locals described the movement as endless, a train on wheels. Roads were widened overnight. New bridges appeared where there had been none the week before. From space, the entire route glowed at night like a silver scar across the continent. Chinese engineers worked alongside Russian crews, sharing equipment but little trust. Surveillance drones from both sides hovered constantly above the work zones. The cooperation was uneasy, mechanical, precise, like two armies forced to fight the same battle for different reasons. Official reports spoke of progress and partnership, but intercepted communications told a different story. Moscow racing to finish before the ground froze solid, Beijing demanding data feeds from every compressor station, and both sides accusing the other of delays. The construction of Power of Siberia 2 was supposed to be an engineering feat. Instead, it had become a contest of control and suspicion, one measured not by distance, but by dominance. And as the line of steel pushed steadily south toward Mongolia's border, Western analysts realized something unsettling. The work pace wasn't dictated by engineering schedules. It followed military logistics. Thousands of kilometers away, in glass towers overlooking Washington, D.C., the satellite images told a story no one wanted to believe. What was supposed to be a civilian project now showed armored escorts, encrypted communication hubs, and airstrips wide enough for bombers. Inside the Pentagon, analysts ran simulation after simulation. The numbers were alarming. Once operational, the pipeline could deliver over $25 billion in annual revenue to Moscow, enough to sustain its war economy even under the harshest sanctions. Europe watched uneasily. The continent had once depended on Russian gas. Now, it feared being replaced. If China became Russia's primary customer, Western sanctions would lose their teeth. In a late-night meeting, NATO energy advisors coined a phrase that would echo through intelligence circles: the silent rearmament, because every mile of pipe meant trucks, generators, communication lines, the foundation of a future military corridor stretching from the Urals to Beijing. In Brussels, policymakers argued over whether to sanction the companies involved. France urged caution. Poland demanded action. Germany, still haunted by its past dependence on Russian energy, chose silence. The CIA's declassified notes later revealed another concern: that the project wasn't just about energy, but data. Fiber optic cables laid alongside the main pipeline could transmit encrypted signals between Russian and Chinese command networks. The infrastructure, one analyst wrote, isn't just underground, it's under the radar. Publicly, Western leaders called for transparency. Privately, they ordered more satellites, more drones, and more eyes on the tundra. Because in the age of modern warfare, even a gas pipeline can become a battlefield. In the heart of the steppe, where wind bends the grass like waves on an ocean, the sound of engines has replaced the songs of herders. This is Mongolia, a landlocked nation of just 3 million people, suddenly standing between two superpowers. The pipeline cuts through 5 provinces, carving across grazing lands, rivers, and sacred valleys older than the Great Wall itself. Moscow promises jobs and transit fees. Beijing promises investment and roads. But to the people who live here, the promises sound the same: distant, hollow, and dangerous. In the capital, Ulaanbaatar, protests flare outside the government palace. Farmers and students march with banners reading, "Our land, not their bridge." Police stand guard as parliament debates what no one dares to say aloud: that Mongolia no longer controls its own borders. Journalists report mysterious flights landing at night in the northern city of Darkhan, cargo planes marked with Russian and Chinese flags. Officially, they carry pipeline materials. Unofficially, no one knows. Villagers along the route describe convoys of military trucks without insignia, guarding construction sites lit up like small cities. They say the soldiers never speak Mongolian, only Russian or Mandarin. "We are surrounded," one herder tells a foreign reporter. "They don't see us." To them, this is just empty land. Ulaanbaatar's leaders face an impossible choice: reject the project and risk economic collapse, or accept it and lose control piece by piece. In diplomatic cables leaked weeks later, a senior Mongolian minister wrote a single, chilling line: "We are being buried beneath their friendship." And for the first time, even the West began to realize the front line of the next great power struggle might not be in Ukraine or Taiwan, but here, in the windswept plains of Mongolia. It began with a simple observation: a line of construction sites glowing in the night where there should have been none. Western satellites zoomed in, adjusting infrared lenses, and what they found changed everything. Running parallel to the pipeline, intelligence analysts identified a second trench, narrower, deeper, shielded with composite plating. At first, it looked like a fiber optic conduit, but when technicians enhanced the images, they saw junction boxes, signal amplifiers, and hardened casings, the kind used for encrypted military communications. In other words, the pipeline wasn't just built to carry gas, it was built to carry information. Data links extended from Russian control stations in Yakutia directly toward Chinese command nodes in Inner Mongolia. A silent bridge connecting two militaries under the guise of energy infrastructure. Alongside the route, analysts spotted 6 new airstrips, each roughly 2,000 meters long, perfectly aligned for cargo aircraft or unmanned drones. Radar emissions in the region spiked. Russian mobile S-400 launchers appeared in temporary camps, then vanished days later. Moscow called them construction defenses. NATO called them deployment rehearsals. Even more concerning were the storage domes being assembled near the Mongolian border, massive steel structures buried under artificial mounds of earth. Officially, they were compressor stations. Unofficially, thermal readings showed temperatures far too stable for industrial equipment. Someone had built them to hide something colder and deadlier. Leaked SIGINT intercepts later revealed code words for a joint initiative between Russian and Chinese engineers. Project Silk Current. The documents described an intercontinental stabilization network capable of rerouting command data in case of Western cyber attacks. But inside intelligence circles, one phrase stood out: dual-purpose transit corridors. Translation: a logistics network that could move both energy and war. The power of Siberia, too, had become something entirely different, a weaponized artery pulsing quietly beneath Asia's frozen soil. By the time the world understood what was happening, it was already too late. Beneath the tundra, the steel veins were sealed, the data lines buried, and the map redrawn. On the surface, the pipeline looked like progress, a triumph of engineering over nature. But deep below, it was something else entirely. A new border, invisible yet absolute, connecting two regimes through a single artery of gas, code, and control. The figures tell their own story. $2 billion invested, 50 billion cubic meters of gas a year, 34,000 workers spread across 3 nations. And for the first time since the Cold War, a new axis has formed, not through ideology or armies, but through infrastructure. In Washington, analysts warn that this alliance could shift the world's balance of power by 2030. A pipeline may not look like a weapon, but when it funds a war, fuels a military, and carries intelligence beneath the ice. It becomes one. In Europe, diplomats debate whether to respond. Sanctions may come. Warnings will be issued. But none of it will stop the steel that's already buried. Meanwhile, in the Mongolian plains, herders watch as convoys vanish into the horizon, leaving behind a trail of dust and silence. Their land, once a passage for caravans and horses, is now a corridor for nations they cannot control. And as night falls over Siberia, a new sound hums through the frozen ground, the low vibration of gas flowing east, steady and unstoppable. The world calls it Power of Siberia 2, but those who understand what it truly means know its real name, the Iron Vein. This is conflict signal, where every pipeline carries more than gas, it carries the future of war.